A big and important poll running this evening on all our platforms. Who can lick sleepy Joe Biden? A. Trump, B. DeSantis, C. RFK Jr. Really remarkable results, and 12,708 of you have voted, and I've only just announced the poll. This comes on the heels of a CNN announcement that 2/3 of the American public think that re-electing Sleepy Joe would be either a serious mistake or a disaster. Will the Democrats persist with Poopy as their candidate? That is the $64,000 question. Robert F. Kennedy is showing remarkable skill in putting forward a coalition of people of left, right, and center behind the idea of owning your truth, of speaking your truth. We'll talk more about that later. Lindsey Graham, the reptilian, repugnant Republican from South Carolina, was in Kiev again. I don't know what it is that first attracted him to Kiev, but whatever it is, he keeps going back over and over and over again. Maybe he's got a friend there. Who knows? But he seems to be back now because he just demanded a larger navy. Larger in what way? He was not clear. But he says that there is a dangerous gap between Chinese naval power and the missiles to sink navies and the United States capability, showing that once again the United States is bent on war with China. I've got something to say to Lindsey that he might not have realized, but big, hulking, floating targets on the sea are OTOs. Building aircraft carriers was the world's worst idea in the age of hypersonic missiles. And hypersonic missiles, China and Russia, for that matter, have in abundance, faster than anyone else's, more powerful than anyone else's. So maybe save the US taxpayer $1 or $2, Lindsey, and come up with a better idea than a larger navy, unless, of course, you meant something else. Lindsey Graham was in the news because in Kiev he was videoed sitting at a table with the Ukrainian leadership, minus the head of the armed forces, who's still mysteriously missing in Kiev or somewhere. Lindsey Graham said that the United States had never spent better money than making Russians die. Even by his rodent standards, it was a rat-like comment for an elected US senator to make. And the giggle on his face and the face of those he was promising, no doubt, more and more largesse, spoke volumes. But they couldn't have counted on it getting a global audience as it has. And it has made Lindsey Graham something of a target, which he might not, in the long run, be grateful for. I myself, if you'll forgive the phrase, now diving deeply into Lindsey Graham. And I'll be bringing you a more or less weekly update on the charge sheet against him. Some charges already known, other charges I will break for the first time. Now this came on the back, if you'll forgive that pun, of Victoria Nuland. You'd have to be, surely, on her back. She said on video to a conference, again filmed by the participants, that she had been working with Zelensky on his counter-offensive for the last 3 or 4 months. 3 or 4 months. She, meaning the United States, she is an Under-Secretary of State for Death after all, has been working with Zelensky for 3 or 4 months. This came on the back of a statement delivered deadpan by Secretary Lloyd Austin that the United States was not at war with Russia. Now that would be laughable enough if the Secretary of State had not revealed the US had been working for 3 or 4 months on a counteroffensive against Russia. It would be laughable enough if it were not for the case that the terrorists that crossed the border into Russia and gunned down innocent civilian people in their homes, in their gardens, in their cars, were actually driving in United States supplied military armored vehicles. It would be laughable if it were not for the fact that the United States is now about to send F-16s into the war in Ukraine. F-16s is definitely a game changer, but not in the way that its advocates imagine. I believe that Russia has reached the extent of its strategic patience with the never-ending supply of more and more sophisticated weaponry, long-range weaponry, into the hands of the Kiev coup regime. And I believe that Russia has made a strategic decision to end this war and end it quickly. And that will not be pleasant for anybody involved, least of all me, who cried out against this war practically daily from 2014. The move of Russian nuclear weapons, battlefield weapons, we're told, at this stage, so close to Kiev, is a harbinger of very dark clouds to come. It is almost certain, in my view, that it brings the day of a nuclear exchange of weapons over Ukraine very much closer. And Mr. Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, said this day that that's it. The Americans will either come to their senses or hell will be the result. I believe, and I'm not speaking for Russia, and nobody in Russia has asked me or told me or advised me to say this, but it is my honest belief on the basis of more than 50 years in Parliament, in politics, almost 30 of those years in the British Parliament, that the Russians have run out of patience and they intend to bring this war to a final conclusion with the defeat of the coup regime in Kiev, a regime change operation, if you will, and the rendering of Ukraine no longer a threat to Russia, which in the end, you know, is what this war was all about. It's what the Minsk II agreements were all about, that were signed by the Ukrainian government and guaranteed by first the German and French governments and then the Security Council of the United Nations. But the Minsk II agreements, as we now know, following a call from President Obama, were merely a ruse to lure the Russians into believing that the problem of Ukraine on its border, killing large numbers of Russian-speaking people in the eastern part of their country, could be resolved by treaty, by international agreement. The terms of Minsk II, because many have forgotten, are worth restating. Because if they had been implemented, a state called Ukraine on its pre-2022 borders would have continued forever. There would have been, if Minsk had been implemented, autonomy of the kind that the people say of Scotland enjoy, if they enjoy it at all, in the eastern part of Ukraine. What's wrong with that? Ukraine would have retained sovereignty over the territory, but the people would be self-governing on an autonomous basis on all the daily aspects of their national and civic lives. That Ukraine would not join NATO, and that Ukraine would not be used by NATO as a threat against the people of Russia and the Russian Federation. the state itself. Very simple terms. If they had been implemented, we would not be talking about this war now. Just think about that. Robert F. Kennedy is now over 20% in the polls of Democratic Party voters in the United States, making a mockery of the idea that there should not be a primary, there should not be debates. But of course, there cannot be debates, because Joe Biden, if it is he, and there's a substantial number of people now think he is the result of artificial intelligence gone mad, Joe Biden could not debate anyone, not even a child, even to tell them about how the hairs on his legs stand up. Not even a child he could sniff. Not even a child whose hair he could stroke. He could not debate against anyone at all, which is why there are to be no debates. But when the incumbent is regarded by 2/3 of the American people as a disaster, the Democratic Party are going to have to think whether they can go into the election in the November of next year and expect to win with a Joe Biden who is visibly fading, wrinkling, shriveling in front of our eyes. Kennedy is young for his age. He's thrusting, he's vibrant, he's dynamic, he's filled with courage, the courage of his father, the courage of his uncle, and he enjoys the resplendence of the Kennedy name. I merely make this point to Senator Robert F. Kennedy's son. If you don't want to end up like Senator Bernie Sanders, you're going to have to put in place a parallel machinery whereby if they cheat you out of the nomination of the Democratic Party, you must be ready to make a third party run for president. And if you do, you stand a very good chance of winning. We're asking in this poll if Ron DeSantis, whose campaign went up like a rocket and came down like a burnt stick within a few minutes of the fiasco on Twitter, is the man to lick sleepy Joe Biden. And from what I can see of the poll, hardly anyone at all thinks that DeSantis is the man. Most of you think that Donald Trump is the man, but a significant number of you think that RFK Jr. is that man. 35% on Twitter, 42% on YouTube, 44% on Telegram, and 29% on the YouTube community poll. Get voting. We want a very large and representative result coming out of all of this. Now, we've heard of forced marriages in Pakistan before, but what about forced divorces? One of many extraordinary developments in Pakistan over the last 7 days since Major Adil Raja last appeared on the show, where I speculated that the puppet regime in Islamabad would seek to divide the people around Imran Khan, the rightful Prime Minister of Pakistan, and in any free and fair election, certainly the winner of any general election held fairly in the Islamic Republic of Pakistan. Major Raja told me that it was already happening. And in the 7 days since, there has been a steady parade of tearful fellow leaders of Imran Khan's party, the PTI, announcing that they had resigned from the party and resiling from their previous devotion to Imran Khan. Now, I don't know if they had been tortured or had been threatened in a persuasive way, made an offer they couldn't refuse, or whether they were rank opportunistic cowards in the first place. I don't know. Major Adil Raja will know, and he's up in a few minutes. But it must be, although you've not seen it on any of the mainstream media, one of the most miserable parades in modern political history. People who were yesterday leaders of Imran Khan's party giving press conferences outside of courts announcing that they were no longer his buddy. It was laughable on one level, it was miserable on another level, and the only question which now arises is, will the people of Pakistan prove more faithful to Imran Khan than his own party leaders? Many of them, anyway, have turned out to be. Only 2 minutes to talk about the victory of Erdogan in Turkey. It is a major setback for NATO. Turkey is, of course, a member of NATO. It is a major setback for the European Union. It is a major setback for the United States, whose president openly opined that he hoped for the defeat of Erdogan as president of Turkey. The European media, the Western media in general, has been all guns blazing, trying to bring down the sphinx-like figure of R.T. Erdogan, but they have completely failed. 20 years he's been in power now. He has piloted a somewhat tortuous course between all of the giant lily pads that he has sought to leap from one to another. But over the last year or so, Erdogan has made it plain that he sees Turkey's future as a Eurasian one, in alliance with Russia and in alliance with China. And you don't have to love Erdogan, and I don't. But when the worst people in the whole world are praying, are ceaselessly agitating, seeking to subvert the democratic will of the Turkish people, just to bring down Erdogan, you've got to say it's good news that he has won convincingly, don't you? Fasten your seatbelts. There's a lot to get through over the next 1 hour and 40 minutes.